We're breaking down the 7 qualities of removal spells to help you choose the right ones for your decks.
I'm Mia, and my favorite JoJo is Jotaro.
I'm BZ. I listen to Chill Synth in the car. We're the Nitpicking Nerds, sponsored by Card Kingdom. That's the place you can go to buy Magic the Gathering singles and accessories. And at the same time, if you use the link that we have for you in the description, you can let them know that we sent you. So you're winning by buying Magic cards you were going to buy anyway. We're winning by staying alive and eating food. And the universe is winning because it's positive karma.
The cats are also winning because they actually get fed. We're also sponsored by Dragon Shield, best sleeves in the multiverse.
Good sleeves.
If you use the code
NERDS
at checkout, you can save 5% of your tax dollars, real money tax dollars, on your entire order, including their new 25th anniversary dual matte sleeves that are silver and black and super cool, super reflective. Go check them out. Tell them we sent you.
Sponsored by Moxfield. Not yet. Guess when? You're wrong. And we have a Patreon if you would like to see a little bit more Nitpicking Nerds in your life. So this is a meaty one today. We're going to be talking about removal spells. This is like your complete guide. We're going to be talking about specific examples, breaking them down into 7 different categories, talking about how to choose the right ones for your deck. When do you want one category over the other? But as we love to do on the Nitpicking Nerds, the first thing we like to do is to define our terms. And we're going to define removal as any spell or ability that will take one or more objects off the battlefield or stack. Pretty broad definition. We wanted to make sure a lot of things qualified so we can really break it down and make it and figure out what makes a removal spell good. What do I want in my deck?
There are a lot of things that can fall into this, from entering the battlefield triggers to just things you're casting right out of your hands to things just stapled onto permanents that you might already have lying around. But there are 7 qualities total. That is efficiency, versatility, scale, permanence, not permanence, synergy, novelty, and interactability. We have a lot of examples for you. We're going to define all these terms as we like to do, as BZ mentioned, and we're going to help you choose the right removal for your decks, along with highlighting some examples as to why these are good and fit in these categories.
A quick question we should probably answer before we get into all the super nitty gritty that we have planned is just how much removal should you play on average in general? I think a really good baseline for us that we've sort of looked through our decks is at least 15. I don't know if I have an upper limit because there's plenty of ways to squeeze removal into your land slot, your creature slot, your synergy slot. Have it be so that when you enact your game plan, you're incidentally removing things. So I don't want to say that there's an upper limit, but I think you really should be baking in at least 15.
I know that sounds like a lot, but when you have it stapled onto very versatile spells, or if you have it on creatures that you already wanted to play certain creatures to begin with, of that type, for instance, it makes it a little bit easier to hit that 15 number. MDFCs also can count in there, and so because of that, even though we might have a no upper limit, I think 15 is pretty normal. For instance, I have a $100 budget Euro deck, and I hit 15 in there despite most of the game plan being churning out lands and getting a lot of value overall.
Yeah, so keep that number in mind as we go through these categories, because now that you're starting with 15 or more, you're going to be splitting that up between some of these categories. So the first one we're going to get to, one of the most important, I would say, it's efficiency. This is the relationship between mana spent and the effect of the spell. Mostly that's going to be how many things am I killing for how much mana.
I mean, when you are on moxfield.com, the best place online to build your deck, they actually have an average mana value at the bottom, which is great to actually be able to tell how much all of your spells cost. But when it comes to removal, you want to have as cheap as possible so that you can make sure you churn out your spells on time. Moxfield's the best way to do that. But enough about
Was that the Moxfield ad? Did you bamboozle me? Was that it?
I did bamboozle
Wow.
you too. But in general, the less you can spend on a spell, the better, because you want to be able to keep up as low mana as possible, because if you have to keep up a ton of mana, you're falling behind on your turn in general when you have to play your creatures or your sorceries and that such.
Yeah, this is how we can make pretty easy comparisons. If I can look at murder, 1 black, destroy a creature. All right, well, that's got its own level of efficiency. I'm paying 3 mana to destroy one thing. And then if I look at if it was single black, destroy target creature, that's way more efficient than murder. So you're going to be comparing a lot of spells this way and being able to determine what is more efficient and what does the same job for less mana. I'd say every deck for sure needs efficient answers. You've got to make sure you're checking off 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 of these spells that are just very cheap. They often have little to no synergy with your deck because they're just the best rate, and they're oftentimes 1-for-1s. Usually as we get more than a 1-for-1, the spells become less efficient in terms of how much mana we spend.
These are quick and easy spells, and you'll see them in a lot of decks. We're going to go by color when we talk about our examples. And the first one we're going to talk about in this is white. These are your Swords to Plowshares, your Path to Exiles. These are your 1 mana exile target creature, get some sort of different effect. And they're very efficient for that rate. Usually killing things takes a little bit more than 1 mana.
Yeah. We're definitely going to go through, and you're going to notice a common theme among the best, most efficient removal spells. Whether or not you want them in your deck, they certainly are efficient rates. The next category is black. I like Snuff Out and Deadly Rollick. We thought 1 mana was the most efficient way. It's actually 0 mana. Paying 0 to remove a creature is so much more efficient than 1 already. Now, these do have some restrictions on top of it. Obviously, Wizards isn't just going to print 0 mana destroy a creature or 0 mana exile a creature. So if you're meeting these restrictions and having this deck building thing, these are absolutely cards to consider. For green, Nature's Claim, one of my favorites, one of my go-tos. Even in heavy creature decks, I often try to slot in 1 Nature's Claim because I like to diversify my efficient removal. And it's like, well, what if they're playing a Humility or something that is really dunking on creature decks that you just need an answer to? Nature's Claim's there for you.
I'm never mad to see a Nature's Claim, even in my creature-heavy decks. Having this in turn 1 and being able to snipe someone's Soul Ring never felt so good. Another way to be able to kill things at a great rate is Force of Vigor. This is just free by exiling something from your hand, and you can hit 2 things. That's an amazing rate.
Yeah, super solid, super good to get you out of a pinch, can really dig you out of some holes. As for blue, I look at things like Rapid Hybridization. 1 mana, destroy a creature. Now, Rapid Hybridization does check a few other boxes, and there are plenty of spells that are going to overlap and be involved in multiple of the 7 categories that we're going to be talking about. But keep it in mind and know that, when you play Rapid Hybridization or maybe even Swords to Plowshares, you're going to be checking possibly other boxes in addition to just a really efficient spell. They do get a 3/3, but in general, we're not going to be talking a ton about the downsides of like giving a creature away. Most of the cards that say blow something up, give them a little something, that's totally fine with us in Commander.
I mean, when you're using Rapid Hybrid, I'm not using it on someone's vanilla 2/2 and giving them a 3/3 in return. Mm-hmm. I'm using it on something that is very threatening, has a very powerful effect, something they can't get back easily, something like that. And so where the trade for a vanilla 3/3 is a trade that I would be happy to make. And how can we go talking about rates without talking about Force of Will, one of the, if not the best counterspell in all of Magic? Sure, you go down a card and you lose 1 life, but when we start at 40 and you have a free counterspell on a stick, that is an amazing rate.
It's going to lead to one of the main upsides of playing these efficient spells is you're going to get mana advantage from your opponents every time you make one of these exchanges. When you Force of Will their 7-drop, their turn is over, but you took an entire turn and still got to hold up the spell that doesn't cost any mana. The same is true of all of these. If I pass my turn after having spent 5 mana and you throw down like Pantlaza or something and I snuff it out, it's a huge swing for me. And if I can keep racking up exchanges like that, I'm going to win the game just based on mana spent.
I think it also lulls your opponents into a false sense of security, because if you're passing with 1 mana or 0 mana or just a measly treasure hidden in the corner or something, it's usually not they might be more likely to cast their bigger spells because they think you have less interaction up. But if you have something that you can convoke out, something you can exile a card and do it for free or discard a card, that will be more surprising to them, and then overall they might be like walking into your trap per se.
Oh yeah, for red there's Mog Salvage, a card I like a lot. It's not a card I have seen a ton of, but it's just a nifty free shatter effect. Definitely one to consider if you haven't considered it. And I think one of the classic efficient spells is Lightning Bolt. Oftentimes you are spending 1 mana to kill one thing, but there is another category where Lightning Bolt is lacking. We know Lightning Bolt often, when you cast it, kills a thing for 1 mana, but what about the range of things it can actually kill? Well, that is our next category, which is versatility. The range of potential targets or effects a removal spell could have. So this is how many different things could I kill with a Lightning Bolt? Only ever things that have 3 or less toughness, so pretty low versatility when it's in my hand.
While this hits creatures or planeswalkers or players if you really need to, it'll be really hard to kill something that has 5 butts or something. So sometimes you want to pay a little bit more mana, which is less efficient, to have more options so you can kill things, but like a greater option of killing them. Decks want a few versatile removal spells, and because those cost more, though, you should probably have less versatile ones and more efficient ones, so your curve just stays lower than higher.
Yeah, you sort of round out your suite of removal spells with a few catch-alls where you go, if I'm holding up this card, nothing is going to go wrong for me. I'm going to be able to answer any threat, or I'm going to be able to fire off this removal spell as a different spell and get a different effect out of it. We'll definitely go over some examples of those. I think it's definitely difficult to fit too many expensive plus versatile spells into the curve, even though they're very satisfying and even though they are good in most situations. We're just starting to get to the point where our hand's clogged up. We can't get these spells out of our hand fast enough. So you want to be careful with those. Let's get into some examples, though.
Yeah, one of the examples is a Braid. This is Lightning Bolt plus a little bit more. You can also destroy an artifact, but the downside is that it costs 1 more mana than Lightning Bolt. So you have the option of destroying artifacts, which is super nice. There's so many dangerous artifacts running around, Commander. But you do have to pay a little bit more, and that is the trade-off that you may have to make, depending on what metas you have or what you're worried about in your games.
Literally the perfect example of you can pay 1 more mana every time to open up the range of targets that your spell could have, like you more than double it for sure. The next one, the most versatile red removal spell, Chaos Warp. If there's a permanent in play, you can probably Chaos Warp it, and it will go away almost all of the time. 99% of the time, it'll go away.
But if you get a unlucky shuffle, it might end up right back on the battlefield. But for 3 mana, you usually are willing to take that chance because you're using this kind of as like a last-ditch effort, whether it's something that your color pie cannot usually hit, or it's just something you really need off the field super badly.
I think Chaos Warp is also the perfect example of how high in mana cost I am willing to go to get a catch-all. I don't think you should really be looking to spend more than 3 mana on a spell whose only function is to remove 1 of anything. I think we have a lot of cards like that. We're going to get into them that cost 3 and they hit any permanent or they hit anything or any spell or whatever. But when we get to like Utter End, that level of paying 4 mana to get rid of any one thing, I'm kind of off of it in terms of I don't want to invest that much to get rid of one thing.
I know it's a precon staple, but Utter End is 4 mana, and 4 mana is just most of a turn, if not fully a turn, depending on where you are in the game. And at some points of the game, turns 2 and 3, it's just uncastable. I don't really want my removal to be rotting in my hand most of the time.
I mean, you're even less high on the 3 mana ones than I am, right?
I think just 3 mana in general is a big chunk of a turn, and if you don't have cost reduction or if you don't have ways to make a lot of mana or treasures or whatever, it's really hard to have those just kind of chilling in your hand. I'd really rather be going for something a little bit more limited, but lower on the mana value so I can play them during kind of like the times where I only have 1 mana sitting around.
An efficient but less versatile spell, perhaps.
Yes.
Next up, blue cards, counterspell. It will counter any spell. That could be any type of permanent. As long as we're on the stack, we are getting a pretty versatile spell in terms of like, what can blue typically deal with? On the board, it's pretty limited to like a few different types of things, but on the stack, we can hit anything. So holding up a counterspell is one of those times where you feel like you're going to be protected against most threats that are going to come down. However, they have to be coming down and not already there.
And you have to also keep up 2 blue mana, which might be tougher if you are in multicolored decks or things that cannot easily produce blue mana if you're running a lot of colorless lands, for instance. Another spell that is very versatile but costs a lot of mana is Mystic Confluence. This has a lot of modes to counter a spell or return target permanents or draw cards. However, it costs 5 mana, and that is a lot to keep up. I have trouble keeping this up, but I still like this because if you keep up that mana, you can draw 3 cards if there's nothing you want to counter or bounce.
Yeah, we talk about versatility in a removal spell. This doesn't have to be a removal spell. If you're winning and there's nothing in play that's opposing you in a valid manner, if you held up Mystic Confluence, you can go, great. End step, draw 3 cards. You don't have to counterspell. You don't have to bounce. This really gives you so many options that if you go through the monumental task of holding up 5 mana, you're going to get rewarded for it, and you're not going to, feel like you wasted your time. If Mystic Confluence was just a counterspell and you pass the turn and nobody casts a spell that's worth countering, you just feel like you got owned. But if you can go, all right, bounce your thing, counter this spell, and then draw a card, feel a lot better.
I think this is one of the reasons why this is like maybe diverging a little. We like things like Mystic Confluence, but we're not fond of 5 mana counter spells that only counter a spell like Access Denied and such, because this is good whether you're winning or losing if you keep up that 5 mana. But with Access Denied, you can only counter a spell, and sure, you get a lot of artifacts or bodies, whatever you really need those Thopters for, that's still 5 mana, counter target spell, which we have better rates for in the game.
Yeah, it's so narrow. It's not versatile. It only does one thing. Black is the least versatile color by far, I think, in terms of what its spells can do. They're very limited for the most part. One of the most versatile black spells is Fel the Profane. Like most MDFCs, the versatility is crazy because what removal spell out there is going to help you hit your land drop if you're getting screwed on mana? Oof, so good. But in terms of the front side, obviously it's just kill one thing. But Mia, tell them about MDFCs.
MDFCs are lands and a spell. Anyways, the other one that we're going to talk about is Withering Torment before BZ gets a little bit too ahead of himself. Withering Torment is outside of Black's color identity because it can hit enchantments at instant speed, and usually it's really tough. Most people, before this card came out, were playing Feed the Swarm to hit enchantments, but having a little bit more mana to hit at instant speed and also not lose the life that with Feed the Swarm would usually lose you if you're hitting something really big like Omniscience is an upside, and that's why some people might want to pay an extra mana for it.
And that might be also a different category that we will cover in more detail. But the classic ones that you're probably thinking of, Generous Gift and Beast Within, when we were talking about Chaos Warp, it's like paying 3 to hit any one thing. I do kind of agree with Mia that you don't want to jam a million of these 3 mana 1-for-1s in your deck, but I think having 1 or 2 is a nice catch-all to know that if you hold it up, you're going to be safe for the most part is pretty solid. A versatile white spell that I like is Angel of the Ruins, kind of trying to get all of the different versions of versatility out there because, yeah, it's a big 7 splashy drop, 2-for-1, big splashy drop. That's a magic term, right? But also, if you don't need that, it kind of does a little bit of an MDFC impression by cycling for a Plains.
It's also just a big body, and if you have flicker effects in your deck, you can get that effect multiple times, or if you just need to swing in for damage or have Angel synergies. There's also Generous Gift, the 3 mana type that BZ was talking about, where if you just keep this one thing up, you know you can hit anything on the board.
As for green, we mentioned Beast Within, but Archdruid's Charm, just the pinnacle of versatility because it's an artifact destruction, enchantment removal, a tutor for a creature or a land, and it's even like a bite spell. Like there's just, if you hold up Archdruid's Charm, you cannot be disappointed.
That's a 3 mana spell I am not mad to keep up. It's not just 1-for-1. It's I can do anything whether winning or losing. That feels great.
There's no point in the game where that card is bad. Our next category is going to be scale of a removal spell. Now, scale we're defining as the number of objects affected by the removal spell. I'm going to spend some amount of mana. How many things am I affecting? We know that Lightning Bolt, we're talking about the versatility of how many things could it hit. Now we're talking about how many things does it hit.
One of these options is one we like to talk about a lot. It's Druid of Purification. This will hit 4 things. That is a lot of things that you can hit on the board, depending on how many opponents you have, maybe even more. But the only problem is that you cannot always pick every single thing you want to get gone. You can pick the thing that you want gone, and everyone else will pick something else that's not yours, which is why we love this, because it can never hurt you. But if they have 10 billion artifacts, let's say, on the board, then you can't get rid of all of them.
Pretty good scale though in terms of like hitting up to, I'll say up to 4 things for a one-time 4 mana investment. Pretty sick. Pick Your Poison is next. We only need to spend 1 mana, and now we're getting rid of 3 different things. The little caveat is that you don't get to exactly choose what things are gone. Sometimes you can choose for them by the fact that they only have 1 enchantment and it's Rhystic Study. Great, I want Rhystic Study gone, and I get that. Pick Your Poison, hitting 3 things for 1 mana, really hard to not get mana advantage out of that, no matter what you hit.
I love Pick Your Poison. It is like a 1-for-1 plus, I like to think about it, because if, for instance, if there's only 1 enchantment on the board and it's Rhystic Study and you pick enchantments, it's 1-for-1 for 1 mana, which is great. That's we're playing Nature's Claim. However, if it's like 2 Soul Rings and someone's Talisman just gets swept up and you pick Artifact, that's a 3-for-1, and I'm happy to make that trade any day.
Feels pretty darn good. Now we also can lump in Board Wipes for this. Board Wipes count as removal. We said any spell or effect that takes something off the board or the stack. So Blasphemous Act, that's a removal spell. It's a mass removal spell. It's one of the best scale to mana spent ratios on a removal spell that you can find. Fiery Confluence is a good one because it lumps in versatility with having 65 different modes and the scale of I can deal 3 to all creatures and take out a bunch of different things, or I could snipe 3 artifacts.
It's a little less efficient, but board wipes are often not that efficient because you're hitting so many things at once. Blast Act is one of those special ones. It's just such a good thing. That's why it's reprinted in every precon.
It's just, if there was like a one of those pentagon meter things where you're like maxing out stats. Blast Act is maxing out efficiency and it's maxing out scale.
I love Blast Act. It's so good. But if we're moving on to black removal spells, which there are a ton of good ones, one of the ones we like to talk about is Soul Shatter, because this usually hits the best thing on every opponent's board for 3 mana.
Pretty good scale there. And Platecrafter is like a different version of that. You know that you're going to be taking out 3 things for 3 mana every time. It's on a creature, so you can maybe do other stuff with it, which we can talk about later. But yeah, we know that we're going to get 3 things for 1 mana, and the opponents are going to choose from that. Next up, it was hard to know what category to put this in because it's just so good at everywhere. But Cyclonic Rift, we had to mention it eventually. The scale of this is everything. Everything they did, it's gone.
Everything that your opponents did. No. All of your stuff is safe.
Yes,
don't worry.
but of course.
Why would we ever touch this? Or you can just hit one of theirs if you only have a little bit of mana to keep up.
Yeah, we can also lump in X spells here because like Curse of the Swine, the scale is whatever you're willing to invest. As you spend more mana, the spell scales in effect and has more and more bits of removal tacked onto it. Other great scaling removal spells include Unexplained Absence. We're hitting the 3 best things in play, and we can maybe even upgrade our own thing or remove one of our things that are hurting us just as an extra bonus. You don't have to, just to get an extra 2/2 out of it.
I mean, the permanence of it. Exile, mass exile, feels so good. And Dismantling Wave, too. I like the fact that you can cycle it if you have a little bit of extra mana to pay, or if you have just a little bit of mana, you can hit 1 for each person, and that's pretty nice.
Yeah, we love to see these 2 and 3 for 1s. Those are the things we're looking for mostly when we get to removal spells that have good scale. Next up, we're going to go to permanence, not permanence. This is how easily the cards can be accessed after being removed. Most of the time, this is a pretty straight up thing. We're talking about like destroying versus exiling versus bouncing versus putting it in exile with 3 suspend counters on it or shuffling it into its owner's library.
Speed of your games definitely factors into this. For instance, if you're in CEDH, having a spell plotted might be the difference between winning and losing, but if your games go 30 turns, having a spell plotted just means it's going to come out next turn, and that might just be fine.
Yeah, I mean, suspend is an example of that where like if I exile your creature with 3 time counters on it, if we're playing a 12-turn game, I'm going to have to remove that thing again. If we're playing a 4-turn game, forget about it. It's gone. It's absolutely gone. So definitely take the speed of your games into how useful these spells can be. We look at like Chain of Vapor is a great CDH removal spell. It only bounces, but that is huge when the games are so few turns, and it's useless in games where they're just going to go, all right, play my Avengers Zendikar again or whatever they have going on. And keep in mind, different decks can access different zones differently. If I destroy something and they're a Graveyard Corridor deck, I probably know that it's going to come down sooner and again.
There's a reason why I usually save my Swords and Paths for Beezy's decks, unlike other decks, which might have a little less access to the graveyard. When we're moving into things that can have easy access versus less easy access, one of the spells that I think of the most is Farewell. This is the ultimate reset. This is just get it out of here, whether that's the graveyard or enchantments or artifacts or creatures. It is the no-no. It is the no-no list.
The most permanence, not permanence, of a removal spell could have is no use again. You will never see these cards again. Make peace with your gods because they are gone, and put them in a separate pile because you don't get to use them for the rest of the game. Nothing locks out the cards it's removing quite like Farewell.
Yes, but on the flip side, there's stuff like Unwanted Remake. This is just a destroy. It's the same rate as Swords and Path and stuff, but your opponents might be able to get that creature back, or they might even want it in the graveyard if they're running things like Dread Return or something like that.
Yeah, so it's a really efficient spell, but you're going to have to balance out the permanence, not permanence, of the spell compared to like a Swords or a Path. It's like a perfect example of, do I want this card? I don't know. I can get a more permanent removal spell for the same mana value. So oftentimes I think we're not really playing Unwanted Remake over Swords, right? Like, that's pretty clear.
Unless I want this game to be like 3 turns and I need that thing in the graveyard, I'm usually not playing Unwanted Remake over Swords.
Oh yeah.
But we're moving on to blue now, and one of the things that I think of with blue is Cyber Conversion. Blue doesn't have a lot of ways to deal with creatures or things that are not on the stack, so I think Cyber Conversion is pretty interesting because it just turns something face down. If you're playing against a Flicker deck, this might not be a great removal spell against it because if they flicker it, it'll come back as it usually did or as it normally did. But if they have a way to, don't have a way to kill it or something, this can trap commanders on the board or just lock something down until they can like block with it to put it in the graveyard or just kill it on their own.
Yeah, Cyber Conversion has a lot going for it because in most cases what you're going to do is lock down a commander. And now we're looking at, how easily can the card be accessed after being removed? It can't be accessed. It's just there. And they're like, going to scratch their head and think, I wish I could just put this back in the command zone, and then I go attack you, and the other person will go, hey, come on through. I do not care.
Please attack me so I can block with it, so I can cast it.
Yep,
again.
and they just will attack you with a flyer or something. Yeah, cyber conversion can be devastating, and then it does have a little bit of like, oh, can they flicker wisp it or something? Next up, imprison in the moon. Now your thing's still stuck in play, but it's a land, and it can't do anything that it was doing before. Definitely another way to ruin commanders. However, the permanence of this is, well, it's an enchantment. If they can destroy an enchantment, their thing is just back in play.
I mean, pros and cons overall with these, but I do like kind of the dichotomy of these two removal spells and just seeing how they fall and whether they're good with your game plan. We're moving on to black right now, and one of them is Baleful Mastery. I don't play this spell that much, but I do like the fact that it does exile the creature.
Yeah, that's the thing to consider with Baleful Mastery is a lot of these black spells that we were talking about that could be, somewhere between 2 and 4 mana. They destroy. So if you really are in need of exile and you really want your opponent's stuff gone, Baleful Mastery might be one to consider over like an Infernal Grasp or something. Oubliette definitely can be devastating and have some very severe not permanence, as you lock down their commander forever until they answer this enchantment.
Oubliette is so nasty. There's points where people might have something sweeping like a farewell, and they go, actually, I don't think I'll be destroying enchantments, so your commander just stays gone.
Absolutely brutal. Next up, Guff Rewrites History is another interesting wrinkle on this, because now we're shuffling them back in. So if they have a tutor, or if they flip it off literally the Guff spell itself, they could hit that same spell again. I think it's a little bit more likely that they'll hit it again than like a Chaos Warp, right?
I mean, yeah, but it's a chance you're willing to take. Plus, it adds a little wrinkle into it. It's not as permanent, not permanence,
That one is permanent, not permanence.
I'm just messing with you guys. But unlike things like Unholy Heat, this is a very efficient removal spell, and it's one of the best removal spells that, in terms of mana to actual damage put out. But it just goes into the graveyard, meaning if they can just bring it back immediately, then that might just be a mana you quote-unquote wasted.
Good example of just default. Most of these spells have just a default permanence, not permanence. Masked Vandal, next up. I really like this, and the reason I give this an edge over some other stuff like Caustic Caterpillar is because it exiles the card. It's gone forever.
Plus, all you have to do is have a creature of that type in your graveyard, and that's not that hard to do if you're playing Kindred decks. I love this in my Elf deck. It's so good there.
Yeah, next up is Unravel the Aether. Kind of a fringe one, not one we necessarily recommend playing a ton, but it shuffles the card in. So if you want to get around Indestructible or something and you don't have a Masked Vandal, you could shuffle it in.
Or if you just have something that like stack the top of their library, actually, I'll have you shuffle your library.
That's pretty good. That's a pretty good corner case.
But that brings us to our next category, Synergy, the added benefits of the spell that come with the specific workings of your deck. Is the spell reusable, for instance? Like, can you reanimate things or flash back things or blink things, which might play into the theme of your deck? If you have a lot of creatures, for instance, and you have a blink theme, and you have that removal stapled onto a creature, you might be able to get it multiple times versus a sorcery or an instant.
Yeah, if your deck has 50 creatures and a Beast Whisperer in it, and I want to add a removal spell, I'm probably going to make sure that removal spell is in the form of a creature, because then I get all of these extra benefits. Can it excel in other qualities based on the cards around it? Will it be more efficient, like our other categories? More versatile because of what my commander does? Does my commander let me target additional things? Or when I do X, do they sacrifice something? So definitely consider what your commander actually does to each removal spell that you might be adding. Some examples: Reclamation Sage in Lathril, Blade of the Elves. Lathril does synergize with elves, and she actually wants a buttload of elves. And Reclamation Sage being an elf, huge nod. And it means that Reclamation Sage, if you could only add one, probably gets in over like a Druid of Purification or a Caustic Caterpillar.
I really love this in the deck. It just makes it so that the theme is that much more synergistic, as the name implies. Another one is Yawgmoth in Mahadi, Emporium Master. You want to be sacrificing things to get dice triggers on your turn anyways, but Yawgmoth will let you sacrifice things, and then will also have some added effects onto him. It's just a very good synergy piece to also help you with your game plan that your commander wants you to have.
Yeah, Mahadi's going to check all the things you sacrifice, so you want to do that proactively anyway, and you're going to be getting effects off of like a Grim Horror Specs. But if we're also killing our opponent's creatures, we're racking up the death tally and getting more treasures. Next up, Aura of Silence in Tuvasa the Sunlit. Tuvasa filling in for any Enchantress commander. This Aura of Silence now being an enchantment. First of all, Aura of Silence already extremely annoying Magic card, but when they can start recurring it and they get triggers to draw cards when it enters or when they cast it, it's going to feel like you just can't beat it.
Submerge in Yuriko's the Tiger's Shadow. If you flip this off the top, that is more damage that you're going to be dealing, but you can cast it for free too. That is just the best of both worlds and plays into your commander great.
Yeah, if there's also other weird stuff you can do where if you have a really expensive creature in play and you're going to hit with a Yuriko, put that on top of your deck and then just zap everybody again for 9 or something like that. Definitely a sweet one. I think Submerge has a lot of homes. Wanted to shout it out here in some ways. Submerge is pretty great. I'm going to call it the Blue Swords. And then, we'll just get that'll bring hype to it.
Okay, I was like, that is some real stakes being thrown out right
The card's silly.
And Delayed Blast Fireball and Maelstrom Wanderer. I mean, you're going to be cascading into things anyways, but if you cascade into this, you get the biggest effect that you normally would have to pay way more mana for.
Yeah, we go from like a pretty good Pyroclasm that is maybe playable or at least kind of okay to, oh my god, I've played against a fully exiled Delayed Blast Fireball enough. It's really frustrating. It's so annoying. The difference is huge. So if you have a commander that can cast things from exile, definitely look into Delayed Blast Fireball because the foretell cost is kind of a ripoff, but when you get it for nothing, it just feels like you're cheating.
I have played against this in BZ's Cascade deck so often. It is so powerful, and it never feels fair.
All right, let's keep going. We have another category. This is Novelty. Qualities a spell has that cannot easily be achieved by the color at large. We touched on this a little bit with Withering Torment. Black can't destroy enchantments as a targeted effect almost at all. Although, at this point, we know that it's sort of creeping into Black's color identity. But as it stands, there's only a few cards that do that. So, Withering Torment, while not efficient or versatile, not super versatile, gets a nod because of its novelty.
But there are also spells in here that you normally wouldn't find in their color identity. For instance, my favorite, Tybalt's Trickery. This is a counter spell in red. Sure, it has a caveat of having them mill a little bit and then flip something off the top and maybe casting that for free. But unlike blue, you just normally can't counter things in red, which makes this a very color pie break and very novel in red's color identity.
Yeah, there's a lot of red decks that would like this card. I'd like to have access to a counterspell because what is red going to do against a board wipe? Most of the time, it's nothing. This is a huge leg up for certain situations. And honestly, now that I've seen this card 150 times from Mia, I think it's just good. I've never seen it and gone, "You're going to counter it? Okay." I go, "No, please, I really wanted the 7-drop. I don't care what I flip off of this. I wanted the thing I was casting."
I also like the fact that sometimes people look at me and go, "Can you counter that?" It's like, I'm in Mardu. Anyways, yes.
Anyway, yes, I can. Thank you for asking. Next up is Green Board Wipe, Azuri's Predation. This is just such a house. I love the fact that it is very flavorful and it's like a Mizzium Mortars for green. But the fact that you leave extra beasts in play means it's a very good card. But green doesn't have board wipes. This is one of your only options. There's like the Altasaur that can fight over and over, but that doesn't really get to the point of a board wipe. Ugin is colorless, so everyone has it. That's maybe one of your other options, but yeah. Green board wipes, slim pickings. Azuri's Predation's pretty sweet.
It's not as efficient as like a Toxic Deluge in black and something, but you're paying that premium to get it in mono green, which is really awesome. Mm-hmm. As we talked about earlier, Withering Torment, that is outside of black's normal color identity to be destroying enchantments, and along with that is Feed the Swarm, because that dealing it's a little bit more efficient, but sorcery speed a little bit worse in terms of timing, but it can still hit enchantments, and that's great.
Yeah, Feed the Swarm specifically is a great example of how much novelty matters to certain players, because I think the card, well, okay, I don't think. The card in a vacuum is pretty terrible, but players play it because they have the option to answer something that they literally couldn't have answered outside of that. There's definitely value in that. I'm just saying 2-mana sorcery, destroy a thing, lose life is obviously a bad rate. We're paying for the novelty. We're playing it for the novelty.
If you don't have any other answers within your colors, then it might be something that you want to consider. But if you're playing green or white, for instance, I don't think that you should ever really be considering Feed the Swarm. Mm-hmm. Another option for this is Resculpt in blue. Blue has a really tough time dealing with creatures, especially just exiling them. But if you're playing black, you never want to be playing this. Or white, you never want to be playing this. But mono blue, if you need to deal with something not on the stack, this is a great option.
Blue creature removal is kind of in the same place as black enchantment removal, because blue as a color is not good at answering creatures. except in Commander it just kind of is, because it has all these like 1 and 2 mana ways to blow it up, and the fact that we give them a 3/3 or a 4/4 just happens to not matter in this format. So like still kind of on theme for the color pie, but definitely the exiling and the hitting artifacts of Resculpt makes it sort of like an extra little break. You feel like you're getting away with something a little bit. And then white also has a few counter spells, but they're very few and far between. I think Reprieve, probably one of the best ones, can be a huge tempo gain, blowout if they don't have the mana to spend to cast whatever Haymaker. Now it's bounced and everybody knows about it, so they just get attacked.
I like Reprieve a lot. I think it's just a little bit toolboxy because it also cycles to give you back your card if you need. Plus, if they're trying to cast like something from your deck, for instance, off the top, or if they steal a spell, you can actually bounce it back to your hand. This is kind of weird in white, and we're not really playing Mana Tithe for the most part.
Yeah.
But I think Reprieve is the best of the white color pie breaks in this.
All right, so let's just talk in general here. How often do you look at novelty when adding removal spells to your deck? Like if you have 15, do you have to have one of them be novel? I think you maybe lean into that more than me. I almost don't look at novelty at all.
I play a lot of colors in my decks usually, so I don't usually have to think about novelty. But
that's true. You play like 3 or 4 or 5.
I do like the 3, 4, and 5, so it's not a problem I usually have to worry about. Mine's usually in the mana base. But I think that if I am in monocolor, I do like to have at least one answer to everything. Now, I don't need a ton of them. If I'm playing like Boros, I don't need the Mana Tithe and the Reprieve and the False Trickery. But if I'm playing just Rakdos, for instance, I would maybe want some sort of Chaos Warp or a Feed the Swarm or something like that. Just like one way to answer it. What
That's
about
fair.
you?
Yeah, I don't want to say, I know I said I don't think about it at all. I don't want to say that. I look at it case by case is a little different, because I really don't care about Feed the Swarm. I might try Withering Torment. I think maybe for me, if the rate isn't there, if the baseline rate isn't like acceptable, I won't look at it for novelty. But if you say, hey, you know, here's a 2 mana way or a 3 mana way to do this thing at instant speed, I'm like, all right, well, maybe.
I also just think it's what does your deck crumple to? Because if you need a lot, like, you know, if a bunch of creatures are really going to really hurt you, then you might want to be looking at more board wipes or something. But if you're in mono green, I'm just saying.
No, novelty is real.
Yeah.
It's real, even if I'm a little bit of a Scrooge about it. Definitely still a real thing, and maybe I should consider it more. Next up, our next 7th category is interactability, the qualities of the spell that make it harder to stop from resolving. Now, this is, I think, the smallest category of the 7 categories of a removal spell. It's something to consider, but most removal spells don't have this. They're just sitting at the default, and they don't have an added layer of protection against interactability. I don't think it's a necessity when deck building to have removal spells that can't be stopped or can't be countered, you know, that sort of thing.
Yeah, but it can be a tiebreaker if you're choosing between two. If they're the same mana rate and they do the same thing at the exact same time, but one can't be countered, I think you're going to be going with that one over the other one. There's also options where if you're worried about things like SWAT effects, if that's a big thing in your playgroup, maybe you want to only have removal spells or lean towards removal spells that have things that say opponent's control on them. They can never be swatted back to yours, so you might want to play things like Assassin's Trophy, for instance.
Yeah, that could be like a slight edge that you give your removal spells if that's like a meta call. In general, abilities are harder to stop once the source is in play, so if you have the choice between 2 cards and one of them has an ability, like you can discard it for an effect, or it's a creature with haste and an activated ability versus like a sorcery, maybe you go towards the thing that's harder to stop once the source is in play. So like Separating Verdict is a classic example. It's just Wrath of God, but it can't be countered. Definitely players look for like that added layer of safety if they were just going to play Wrath of God anyway, and they just go, can't be countered.
Another thing that we actually really like to play are the channel lands. These are your both Sages and your Ottawaras and stuff like that, because these are abilities that when you channel them, and most people are playing counter target spell but not counter target ability, so these have a lot less like counter ability or remove ability than other spells might. They
just get around everything. They get around protection because they're colorless. They get around like non-land like target of non-land thing because these are lands doing it. They just really, they kind of get around everything. They're pretty silly. And the last and most played one by far, almost demanded this category for itself, is Croson Grip. I wouldn't play Croson Grip for literally any other of the categories, but it's got that layer of interactability where it will fire and it will destroy the thing. You know, you go from having it to casting it, then it goes straight to the thing happens and it resolves. So there is something to be said for Croson Grip, and I think that's going to segue us right into our little examples where we just talk about everything together. We wrap it all up, and now we can take some individual removal spells and just plug them in. So let's start with Corrosive Grip and plug it into the 7 categories.
The first one is efficiency. This is not very efficient because it's 3 mana, and usually we can get a type of removal for artifacts or enchantments for 1 or even 2 at times.
Yeah, we're competing with like Pick Your Poison, which has the scale, and we're competing with Nature's Claim, which has the efficiency. The versatility of this card, mediocre. It's enchantment or artifact on a green card. That's kind of like the default, right? That's what I would expect.
Yeah. Scale, single target, because as we mentioned earlier, it's not Pick Your Poison. You can't get 3 or more.
Yep, just 1 there. Permanence, not permanence, is just normal. It just destroys. It's kind of, we're not asking for more than that, but it doesn't give us any extra bells or whistles. Does it have synergy with your deck? Probably not. I put not really. Most green decks don't care about an instant being cast. They can't recur it or do it again. If this was a reclamation stage, you probably could do it again, or you could get a trigger off of your Beast Whisperer.
Is this novel? Not really. It's pretty normal.
Pretty standard for green to do this.
Destroying things? Yeah, that's pretty normal for green.
And then the interactability of it is great. It will resolve if you cast it. The problem for us, though, when we plug it into the other 6 categories is just like, it doesn't feel like we're getting away with anything. And there's problems with the spell costing 3 and being something that you can't cast until later. If I could just cast Nature's Claim 2 turns earlier or squeeze it into a mana curve when I curve out, I would get the same effect.
Yeah, we are not that high of fans of Corrosive Grip, if you can't tell. But moving on to a spell that we are a little bit higher on, it's Pongify. The efficiency for this one is great. It's very high. 1 mana to actually destroy something, that's a great rate.
Versatility, it's a little bit low. It's not like this has any other modes. I can't do anything except remove a creature with it, so it's pretty low. Scale, single target, kind of the default for when we're paying 1 mana. Permanence, again, not permanence. We're talking about permanence. It's normal, it just destroys. Synergy, potentially. When we start shifting into different colors, red and blue have more likelihood to synergize with instants and sorceries than a green card. So I think there is potentially some synergy here.
And with novelty, it's high. Usually blue, as we mentioned earlier, can't destroy creatures when they hit the battlefield. So this is a great thing to have in the deck. And also interactability, I'd say pretty normal. You can counter this as as per usual. It's not like a, split second. But overall, we like this a lot better because it has a great rate and it can be fired off at instant speed and can potentially synergize with your deck.
Yeah, the novelty plus efficiency, definitely a good combo because there's only like 4 or 5 of these blue spells that are instants and can hit something for very cheap that's a creature. Next up, we'll talk about Lethal Scheme. The efficiency of this card, very high because we're talking about convoking, spending 1 or 2 or 0 on the card. I guess we're aiming for 0, right? That's like if that's your average case, the efficiency is very high. Versatility, it's low. It only destroys a creature or a planeswalker.
Yes, the scale, single target, 1 for 1, usually like a lot of removal spells. I think that's pretty default. Permanence, not permanence. This is pretty normal. I mean, it destroys it, so if they can get it back from the graveyard, then that might be a little bit less than an exile effect. Synergy can be very high because you're going to be playing this in creature-heavy decks, and you're going to be casting it for free most of the time. And the novelty, normal. Black destroys creatures. That's its normal thing.
Yeah, I mean, talk about that synergy, though. When we get to loot 4 times, put things into the graveyard, even putting +1/+1 counters on our creatures, the synergy plus efficiency ceiling, definitely why I go after this. The interactability is normal. It's just a standard card. Like, the interactability on most cards is normal, and some of them have a little bit of a bonus. Next up, one of your favorites, Unexplained Absence. We're talking 3 for 1. We're talking exile. So it's efficiency slightly below average. 4 mana for 3 things is still nice. It's not bad.
Yeah, or maybe even it's 4 things, but overall 4 mana is a little bit rough to keep up. But the versatility is so high. It's non-lands. It's the fact that it can hit 1 for each person, maybe even your own thing. If you have a useless token hanging around, it could be something better you convert it to.
Oh yeah, the scale is high. It's got 3 targets. It's just 1 spell. This is how we can stay ahead and go toe-to-toe with our opponents and get mana advantage, and we're easily hit like 12 mana of the spell just for you spending 4, and even upgrading a tapped token into an untapped thing or whatever. Permanence, not permanence. There's a C, not a T. It's above average because we're exiling. It's definitely a nod above something, if you're like a generous gift that just destroys.
Synergy is normal. White isn't usually looking for a lot of instants, so it might have synergy with your deck. Probably not, though. Novelty, pretty normal. I think that white has an easier time exiling than most other colors, so it's not that uncommon to find. But being able to exile almost any type of permanent is a little bit higher than average, I'd say.
Pretty much the only thing white is doing that's super novel is like a counterspell, because any permanent, white can remove it, no problem. White's got the removal locked down. interactability, it's a normal card. I hope that us sort of like mapping out some different removal spells helped, to contextualize all these categories. I definitely hope that you got some value out of it because we talked a lot about removal.
But if you want to see our guide on mana rocks, you should check out this video right here. It'll help you build your deck.